let people know you're a senator. I'm not going to answer the question because the question is radical left. Will you shut up, man?
Listen,
it's a very important question. Try to be honest.
He stood up. No, the answer to the question is no.
Ukraine.
No, sir.
With $1 billion, if you
that
get rid
is
of the
absolutely
not true. My son was in Iraq. He spent a year there. He got the Bronze Star. He got the Conspicuous Service Medal. He was not a loser. He was a patriot, and the people left behind there were heroes.
Really?
And I resent.
Are you talking
like
about
hell.
Hunter? Are you talking about Hunter?
I'm talking about my son, Beau Biden. You're talking about.
I don't know Beau. I know Hunter.
Yeah,
Hunter got thrown out of the military. He was thrown out, dishonorably discharged.
That's not true. He wasn't dishonorably.
Cocaine use. And he didn't have a job until you became vice president. Once you
None
became
of that
vice president,
is true.
he made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
that is simply
and various
not
other places.
True.
He made a fortune.
My son.
And he didn't have a job.
My son, like a lot of people we know at home, had a drug problem. He's overtaken it. He's fixed it. He's worked on it, and I'm proud of him.
But why was he
proud of
given
my
tens
son?
of
He knew this was happening, knew how dangerous it was going to be back in February, and he didn't even tell you. He's on record as saying it. He panicked, or he just looked at the stock market. One of the two, because guess what? A lot of people died, and a lot more are going to die unless he gets a lot smarter, a lot quicker.
Mr. President?
Did you use the word smart? So you said you went to Delaware State, but you forgot the name of your college. You didn't go to Delaware State. You graduated either the lowest or almost the lowest in your class. Don't ever use the word smart with me.
God, what can I say? I felt last night like I was going to vomit. Obviously, the worst debate in American history. Remember in our history textbooks when they talked about how Nixon was sweaty and people lost their minds? Well, look at how far our country has fallen in this area. This was end of empire stuff. This was dystopian. Look at the history books. See when the United States fell off as the world superpower stuff. We already have, but this could be kind of the breaking point unless Biden kind of pulls himself up and actually unites the country after this. I don't know if he's capable of doing that. I believe that a social democrat would have been the way to go in that area, but I digress. The most important points here. Trump continues to try to run as an outsider. You are the president. You are no longer an outsider, so it doesn't work. And now Biden has records, a presidential history of failures, objective failures on the economy, on COVID, on racism, what have you, that Biden can take and attack Trump on. So he can't just run as the bomb thrower outsider when he now has a record as president. But back to Biden. Biden, I think, was adequate, but he still struggles to speak. And that is a reality and something that the Democrats are going to have to grapple with. He's not as sharp as he once was, and that stinks, but he did okay. It was serviceable. And I do think he won because two of the moments I just showed you there were just absolutely devastating for Trump, and they were self-inflicted. So, firstly, Trump getting desperate and pivoting to Biden's college grades, which I read an article about Giuliani when I covered it yesterday, his debate prep, when he was helping Trump out. And he randomly referenced Biden's college grades and him being stupid or something like that. And what do you know? It ended up in the debate. Biden had Trump cornered on COVID, laid some really good haymakers on him, right? As good as Biden can do. and Trump immediately pivoted and went on the offensive because that's how he responds to everything. And he went after Biden's college grades. We're in the middle of a pandemic that's killed 200,000 Americans. Talking about college grades. We're talking about college grades. We're talking about practice. We're talking about college grades. That's not going to resonate with Americans. They're going to be like, what are you talking about, dude? We're talking about this issue of this virus that has completely hamstrung American life for almost a year at this point. Or, well, it feels like an entire year, an eternity. But since March. You're going to talk about his grades? I thought that was devastating. And lastly, the number one thing for me, the Hunter Biden thing. Ooh. Wow, was Trump cruel. and monstrous in that moment. Trump berating Biden about his sons. Firstly, when Biden tried to invoke his son Beau, who's passed away from cancer at this point, and Trump starts yelling over him and then says, I'm talking about Hunter, and then goes after Hunter for struggling with drug addiction. And then Biden says, I'm proud of my son. Look, I'm no fan of Biden, but even talking about it there, how he said that to the camera, that made me emotional and made my loved ones I was watching with emotional, my friends and family. Like, I talked to them after that, and I spoke to people too who just said, wow, I really didn't like when Trump went after Biden's son there. And I said it at the time, and Biden's response was really good. It's the humanity, it's the way he can connect with people. That was old school Biden, and it was authentic. And God, that was an ugly moment by Donald Trump, and you saw who he truly was there. And by the way, Trump, your sons all do blow, and it's obvious that Don Jr. is high as balls when he goes on TV, just so you know. But anyway, that is not going to play to the suburban voters, specifically suburban female voters that Trump needs. Shouting interruptions and often incoherent crosstalk filled the air as Mr. Trump purposefully and repeatedly heckled and blurted over his rival and the moderator alike in a 90-minute melee that showcased the president's sense of urgency to upend a race in which polls show him trailing. Mr. Biden labored to get his points in over Mr. Trump's stream of interjections, turning directly to the camera for refuge from a scrum that hardly represented a contest of ideas. From the opening bell, Mr. Trump came out as an aggressor, speaking over Mr. Biden in what seemed to be almost din by design. Pulled a former vice president who has run as a statesman promising to restore the soul of America into a mudslinging contest. He bulldozed Mr. Biden and the moderator, Chris Wallace, throughout the evening, but his goal, other than making for a convoluted contest, was less clear. Mr. Trump seemed principally focused on undercutting and disorienting Mr. Biden rather than on presenting an agenda or a vision for a second term in the White House. Mr. Biden's visceral dislike of Mr. Trump practically burst through the screen. He told Mr. Trump to shut up. He called him a clown and a liar. He tagged him as a racist. You're the worst president America has ever had, he said at one point. I mean, by the way, this was as Trump was talking over him. So he started off cordially. Keep yapping, man, Biden said at another. Mr. Biden has staked himself to a steady lead in the race, largely due to a historic gender gap. Women are supporting him far more than Mr. Trump, and by a far greater margin than Mr. Trump's advantage among men. While Mr. Trump tried at times to explicitly tailor his points to suburban women who have been at the center of his demographic erosion, his bullying performance seemed unlikely to win them back. Mr. Trump has long seen politics in terms of strength and weakness, winning and losing, but his interruptions and self-aggrandizing seemed ill-suited to expanding his political coalition. So that brings that back to the key point that I tried to make earlier about that moment when Trump went after Biden's family and kids. That is not going to play with suburban voters and suburban female voters, the specific coalition that Trump needs to win back. He torpedoed himself because he can't help it. He needs to needle and go after and hit below the belt. That's who he is. But that's not what he needed to do in this debate here. I don't think he won over any voters that weren't already in his camp. And I think a lot of people who might have not been paying attention to the race, which is still baffling to me, but there are a lot of them out there, saw this and went, whoa, we're in the middle of many national crises right now. Many. An economic crisis, a pandemic, a racial reckoning, all of these things. And this guy's talking about Biden's college grades, and he's going after his dead son and his son who struggled with addiction, which now has become less stigmatized in this country as the opioid crisis has ravaged this nation. And people now know so many people have family and friends who've struggled with addiction. And Trump's going after Biden for that on a purely human level. When you're looking at this not in terms of policy, left-right politics, looking at that exchange, that's what just sticks out to me. Voters are going to be like, that was awful. It's going to be such a turnoff for suburban voters, the exact coalition that Trump needs and that he just decided to spurn and self-destruct in that debate last night. Or I shouldn't call it a debate. It was an absolute embarrassment to this country. And the American people deserved better. I get it. You can be critical of American culture, and the American people haven't made the best decisions in terms of who they're voting for, but they aren't given a lot of great options. And last night was indicative of that. It was very sad to see. It was a very sad moment in American history.